Hi, everybody. You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. Okay, where do I start? For some reason, I can never, ever start a podcast without something going wrong lately. And my poor guests are probably like, who is this hot mess that I've been set up with by my publicist or whoever it is? I cannot get it together. So there's that. But what I will say is it's beautiful today. I'm looking outside of my new house in my beautiful yard with all the butterflies. Everyone knows I love a monarch butterfly flying right by right now. So I think that's a good sign. And I went on a glorious walk by the beach today because I live right near the beach, Henry. So I'll bring you in a second. And with my two Labradors that I love so much. And I just kind of this morning took a second to myself just to say, like, I feel so lucky to be here in this moment, in this place. And like I tell all of you often, like, life's really difficult. It's really hard. We go through hard things, but like try to take in the good moments when you have them. And I had a really great moment this morning. And so like when I look up to God, I say prayers sometimes when I'm walking, or I talk to my angels that are always with me. I think it's important just to take in those moments. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Henry. It's so nice to meet you. I know we got off to a rough start. I had to switch from Squadcast to Zoom because nothing can ever work correctly for me, but I'm just so happy you're here. We've all been put here for a reason, and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
Everyone, so grateful to have Henry Shukman on the podcast today. He is the author of several books, including Original Love, The Four Ins on the Path of Awakening. It is available now. And he is also a poet. He is the co-founder of a brand new app, which I can't wait to talk about and hear about, called The Way. He is also the spiritual director emeritus. Did I say that wrong?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, great. I said it right. Everyone knows when I'm reading something, I tend to screw it up. Of the Mountain Cloud Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we're just going to talk about your life today. So it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Meghan. It's great to meet you, and it's great to be part of your show. And I'm honored to be on as a guest. And actually, I'm just curious, like beach and monarchs. Are you in California? Are you West Coast? Where are you?
I'm a West Coaster. I live in Manhattan Beach, California. So yeah, I love it. Yeah, great. I love the beach. I think I talk about it a lot. It's for my listeners, they know I always say the beach, the ocean saved my life.
Yes. I feel the same way. You know, I've been spending a lot of time in Costa Mesa recently, where one of our sons lives, and we've been supporting him.
We'll have to
meet up. I'd love to.
I love Orange County. Yeah.
I mean, being able to go to the beach every morning and taste the different moods, you know, it's like whatever I'm kind of not the best riser, you know. I mean, I get up early, but I'm not automatically in a sort of beautiful mood first thing. But I go to the beach, and when I'm down there, and every time it's like it's always different. You know, the mood is always different, and even when it's really looks really similar from maybe the day before, the mood is different. And I just love exposing my system to the mood of something much bigger than me. You know, it just does me so much good. So anyway,
it's so important. I think I had an author on recently, Banning Lion. His book's amazing, by the way. For everyone, I'm going to plug his book because it's amazing. And he talks about nature and tapping into nature. For him, it's hikes. And for me, it's the ocean. And like you just kind of talked about, staring out at this big, giant ocean.
Yeah.
With so many, there's so much stuff going on in the ocean that we don't even understand. It's so beautiful to look at. It's kind of a joke when you live at the beach. There's like memes about this, that every time I see a dolphin, it's like the first time I've ever seen a dolphin. You know what I'm saying? Like somebody will be like sitting on the beach and you'll just go, oh my gosh, look everyone, there's dolphins. And I live here and I see them all the time, but there's nothing like seeing a dolphin or a family of dolphins, right?
Yeah, totally. But I also love clouds, the way the clouds over the sea are always different. And just, just the feel of the sand. Every time I go there, it's just a bit different. I mean, I feel this strongest in the early morning, actually, because there's a thing where when the sun's been up like an hour or two, it kind of just gets turned into day, but the specialness of the early hours when the light is new and the world's in some way like the new day feels like it's just been born and it doesn't quite yet know what it's going to be. And I don't know, that really is magical. And I mean, I live most of the time actually in New Mexico, in the mountains in Santa Fe, which is a beautiful, I'm really
so
lucky.
Beautiful.
It's another beautiful place. Yeah. But it's the same. I find, these days I always get up and go for a walk immediately. I just pull on clothes and get outside, because there's something about getting outside into whatever the weather is doing early on, just in the early hours, especially right before dawn, right after dawn. It's got a magic in it that resets the human soul, I think, or brings the human soul into the day in a different way. I don't know.
I think it's so true. I think it's so true. And I'm sorry to go off on this nature tangent, but this is how I roll. For my listeners that know, I can't stay focused on one thing very long, but it's when, I talked about this a few minutes ago. It's like every day, like you just said, it's a brand new chance to start over again. And life is hard. Life is hard. And we'll get into your story, and, my listeners know mine. And there's a lot of really hard things going on in the world right now. Yeah. And just to be able to have that chance to start anew every day, no matter what's going on. Like you could be going through something really traumatic, but just for that, I talk a lot about being a survivor of really bad depression, and I was suicidal for a while. And like in my chapter I wrote in that book, and I'm writing in my book, I talk about the ocean saving my life, and just, the moments of being able to take in, being able to like start over. It's really important. And getting out and walking, like those walks that I take every day, they save my life every day. I'm so grateful. Anyways.
I totally relate to all the above.
Yeah, it's so important. I want to talk about you though. I always ask my guests when they come on, before we get into your book and all of the other stuff, I want to hear about where you're from and kind of your early life, if you're comfortable talking about that.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Oxford, England, where both my parents were professors, and it was a great place. It was a great environment. I had I think in many ways kind of awesome education, and I was deep into languages from the age of 7, and I'm really grateful for that. We had French, Latin, Greek, added in German, added in Russian. By the time I was, 18, I'd had Latin. I had like 6 languages, Latin and Greek as well, and all those other ones. And it was really, I think, amazing kind of way for my brain to be trained in some way, to be seeing all these other ways of seeing the world, which every language is. Every language is actually an invitation to a different way of seeing the world, I think. And some of those being ancient languages from 2,500 years ago, it was amazing. But I grew up with a lot of trauma. My parents, in a nutshell, when I was 6 months old, my mum went away for 10 days, and that's how she weaned me. She went to Russia. She was as a Russian speaker, she was recruited by the British, MI5, the espionage thing. That she was basically a sort of low-level spy. Actually, so was my dad. It sounds kind of glamorous. It wasn't really glamorous at all. It was common for people in Russian studies to be helping with, because not that many people spoke Russian, and it was the Cold War. So anyway, she went off to do something in Leningrad in Russia, now St. Petersburg, and formerly St. Petersburg, then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg again. But she that was how she weaned me. She just went away. And when she came back, I was covered from the top of my head to my toes in really bad eczema. Very severe. I had to go to hospital repeatedly through my early life. I spent multiple days in hospital, and it was really, it was a very heavy trauma, and it also, because it was my skin, it hurt to be hugged.
And this was at, so I talk over sometimes, so I apologize for that,
no,
but I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
So the first 3 years of your life are, if you have trauma at that age, it affects the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So my listeners know I lost my sister when I was 2, and I've carried that kind of throughout my life, even though we can't really remember it. So if you were 6 months old, and went through that trauma. And then I wonder, was the loss of your mother being taken away so young, did that manifest the eczema? I think
so.
Yeah. I believe in that. I believe that's.
I totally do. And she came back, 11 days later, but the damage was done. My system didn't reset. I had this really severe eczema into my 20s, and actually, that wasn't the only thing. My parents split up when I was 7, and it was very, very painful. And there was a lot of, this was England, where people weren't really open. They didn't talk about things. And it was really hard. So as a child, I was carrying an immense burden of guilt and shame, thinking that I'd somehow caused the divorce. It's a very natural thing for a young child to think they've caused things. So they might, from a broader perspective, you think, why on earth would you think that? But actually, it's very common for children to feel that they're at the center of things and they've made things happen. And it was a burden of guilt, and I felt abandoned by my dad, and I felt deep shame. And in addition, I had this disfiguring skin condition that is also a source of a lot of shame. And, by the time I was, I evolved adaptations to live with it, as we do, and one of mine was being academically motivated, and, it was something I could do. And I really shut down my emotional life, because I had no support, recognition, acknowledgement of my emotions, and I quickly learned,
especially if you were told or taught, culturally or wherever, how the society worked at that time, to not talk about things. And then on top of that, being male, we all know you're not supposed to talk about having, divorce, loss, grief, any of those things. But I find it's fascinating too, that the body can manifest. We all know that, things. For me, you went into studying. I went into acting and going into characters. And, that was my way of coping. And it sounds like your way of coping was, books and educating. I kind of wish I would have gone that route instead of the acting route. But my question to you too is, you brought up something that I'm so jealous of, the 6 languages or however many languages. Do you still speak all of those languages? I need to know this.
No, I mean, the only ones that I commonly get to speak are Spanish and French. And,
amazing.
But there was a time, there was a point when, I was doing, I was a graduate student doing a PhD that actually I only did it for a year and realized this is not for me, and I gave it up. But at that time I was having to read actually 8 languages. It was crazy.
Wow.
It was Greek, ancient Greek, Latin, German, Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. It was an assumption that you could do French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese as a matter of course, because they're all Romance languages. So if you know Latin and one of them, you should figure out the others. And so my tutors and professors were just, they wouldn't think twice about saying, here's the reading list, and, things, the articles were in any of those languages, and you're just expected to say, well, I was in the particular field I was in. But anyway, so yeah, that was cool and good. But what I discovered along the way when I was a teenager, like 13, 14, I met this old man. He probably actually wasn't so old. He seemed old, who came every summer to the valley where we lived just north of Oxford, called the Cherwell Valley. And he was what they used to call a tramp, meaning kind of a British version of a hobo. And it was a real thing when I was growing up. This is in the 1970s, that there was still, they used to call them gentlemen of the road. These guys wandering the countryside and sleeping in old sheds and huts and, little hedges sometimes. And this guy, he was called Speedy. And he was a bona fide tramp, and he came to our little valley every spring and stayed right through summer and left in the fall. And I got to know him. And he was kind of scary, but I was drawn to him, and he became a kind of, occasional sort of mentor. And I started to realize there were people on this world who lived a totally different way from everybody I knew. And not just the fact that he was living outdoors, like he didn't have a home, everywhere was his home in a certain way, because he was very good at living outside, He'd figured out a lot of tricks for living rough. But also he actually lived in the sense of he experienced the world in a totally different way. He had a sort of electric buzz about him. I mean, he was very calm, but he just was alive. His eyes sparkled, and, in a way that, when I was with him, I remember the first time he came into our house, actually, my mum was giving him some food, and he was it was like a sort of force of nature walked into the room. And my body felt it, like, this guy's alive in a different way. And it was soon after that I wrote my first poem. And I've been writing poems, it was sort of, I was in that literary world, that I was brought up in, and it wasn't so weird. But after meeting Speedy a few days later, I suddenly really felt this urge to write about the stars low in the sky, and then the lights of a far-off carnival, or what we call a fun fair in Britain, and how the stars and the fun fair lights kind of mixed across the rooftops. I could see them from the top of our house. And I just suddenly wanted to write a poem about it. And I felt it was the first time I got just kind of taken over by a surge of energy, and wrote this poem that was, It almost felt like it was writing itself. And it brought me into a new kind of intimacy with the world, like I'd never experienced before. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm alive in the world and loving the world and feeling the world and talking about the world in this poem in a way that I had no idea I could ever do. And
you were called to it. It sounds like it was almost like Speedy was your like little tunnel into like what you were supposed to do. I think we all have that kind of thing that happens in life. I say all the time, I believe everything happens for a reason, and people hate it when I say that.
Yeah.
Because, it can anger people, but I just really believe that everything's like a lesson, and we're supposed to be on this planet to learn things. But I also wonder, my question to you is, I don't know what the poem was about or what it said, and maybe you can tell us, but I wonder if you were drawn to him because we live in a world of like such materialism, and everything's about consumerism, and, just being like 13, 14 and, wanting the next toy or whatever it was at that age that you were into, and realizing that there's people that can live their lives and be happy, just learning something new and wandering the earth every day, where we all kind of like look down on them, whereas some of them are so full and live these lives, in poverty that we'll never understand.
Exactly. It was like he had a wealth because he was so alive and he was engaging with the world, and all the world was kind of his. Mm-hmm. And we live in this little box called a house and kind of venture out in another box called a car. It was like, God, this is a terrible way to live compared to him. And, there was another thing about him that I've often reflected on, is that he taught me that every day he called it, I just remember his voice. He said, "Oi, stop still," he said. And what he meant was, I stay still. So every day he would be still for a while. And he called it stopping still. It's a British expression in the old days, and he literally meant he'd find a place to sit down and he would just do nothing. He'd just be still for a piece of time every day. And he said, these people, everybody else, they don't know nothing because they won't stop still. He said, they have no idea what's going on because they don't get still every day. And that was his, I don't think anybody had taught him that. He just figured it out. Like, you change if you get a bit of stillness every day. And I can't say I started doing it then, but that was a seed. And later, at the age of 24, I started to meditate, in part probably because I'd got that lesson from Speedy, and meditation was my key to open a door to a path of healing, because it began when I started to meditate, I think just because I was still each day. Obviously, it's different for everybody, but for me, my nervous system was so frazzled, so fried. Literally the first week that I started meditating in the system I was taught, which was TM, Transcendental Meditation, is a big system. Mm-hmm. And in London back then, it was kind of the only one that you'd hear about, this in the late 80s. And I started, the week I started doing it, you do 20 minutes morning and night. And the week I started doing it, I slept like 20 hours a night. My system was just pouring off exhaustion, just discharging so much fatigue, so much stress that it had been carrying for decades, even though I was only 24. And it was, I remember, every morning in that week, I got up after a huge, heavy night of sleeping and I did my sit And after it, I got up sort of feeling fine, made a cup of coffee, and then suddenly this wave of fatigue would hit me. And I'd just sit down on the couch, and the next thing I know, I'd have slept till lunchtime, but the last morning I got up the same as ever, and I did my sit. And after the sit, I made a cup of coffee, and I was waiting for this wave of fatigue to hit me, and there wasn't one. I was awake and calm and clear, no drowsiness at all, peaceful. And I remember it was a rainy day in London where I was living at the time, and I went downstairs from the flat and out into the street. This soft rain was coming down, cars going by, and it all just looked so beautiful. It was so peaceful. And I felt, wow, I love this world, and I hadn't felt that in so long,
Do you think that, okay, I'm going to be honest. I cannot, I can't meditate. I say that you're probably going to get mad when I say that, but I know I need to, but I think my brain is so overstimulated, like you kind of talked about from childhood trauma and all the stuff I carry, that when I go into it, it's like doing a yoga class. I'm the girl that turns around and stares at the clock. And everybody I've ever, like every therapist, every Reiki session, everything I've done, they're always like, you need to meditate. And I almost have a fear of meditation, to be honest with you. So I find that fascinating, that your story.
I was so desperate, and I just at that time didn't know any other resources,
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say also that, like, within a handful of weeks of starting, like I think 6 weeks or so later, I realized, what started to happen was every time I sat down to meditate, I felt this like a rock in my chest. Actually, I thought of it as like an iron rod in my chest. And I thought, what the hell's this? And I went to the instructor who trained me. You could get one free like tune up with them in the first 3 months. And I went to see him, and I told him about this, and he said, well, let's just try it. And so we did a sit together, and he said, tell me when you can feel it. And, within a couple of minutes I said, yeah, okay, I got it. It's this tight, hard, dense feeling here. So he didn't really have any advice, but he sort of said, so don't use the mantra until it's gone. Just breathe with that feeling. And then I can't remember exactly how it happened, but I had the idea suddenly, could this be an emotion? And I had a friend who was doing therapy. It was, this was like my mid-20s, so not everybody was doing therapy back then. So she was a little unusual to be doing it, but she was a real outspoken, kind of spokesperson for it. She thought that we should all be doing therapy, and she persuaded me to come to the therapy group that she was in that met on a Saturday morning. And man, I just like, oh my gosh, I need this so badly. And so I started therapy, and a healing journey began for me. But that was, I guess I'm just saying that it wasn't like meditation did it all, not at all. But meditation was a great barometer. It could show me, Henry, man, you need some help, and I would never have dared think that, let alone act on it before I started meditating. Because I was
sorry, but don't you think you're so lucky to have tapped into that stuff so young? Because your 20s most people cannot tap into. I mean, I know I 100% couldn't in my 20s tap into any self-reflection, or, I just said I can't even meditate, and I'm an old lady. So I just find that fascinating that you were self-aware enough to be able to do those things. Because to me, when you're in your 20s, you're still a kid.
Yeah. And also, the challenge as well then is that it's so difficult in your 20s to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to prove themselves and be this powerful, strong person of some kind or other, or this effective person in the world. And to be like, oh my gosh, I'm a basket case. I need help. That's so hard in the 20s. And it's hard at any time, I know. But then, there's another piece here that I don't know might be relevant, which is that when I was 19, I went away from home for 6 months. I went to work in Argentina. My father in his college at Oxford had an Argentinian colleague who fixed up a job, like a gap year type of thing, for me and a friend of mine. And we went out to Argentina, worked on a ranch for a while, and then we backpacked in South America, in Bolivia mostly. And during that time, towards the end of it, I had a really extraordinary experience, which was actually my eczema cleared up when I was away. For the 6 months I was away, I hardly had any, which was like a miracle to me. And the moment I came back, it came back. The moment I went home, it came back. But I had an amazing experience near the end of that trip, which was like this. I was all alone on a beach as the sun was going down. And it was a really remote place. And I suddenly realized, like, hey, if I look around, how do I know this is the 20th century? And I realized there was nothing to tell me it was the 20th century. There was a boat moored offshore, but, that could have been 1,000 years old. It was just a boat with a sail, And suddenly I was looking at the water with the light on it, and suddenly I wasn't separate from what I was looking at. It was like the me in here looking at the world out there, it just melted into the world out there. I just became inseparable from the world I was in. And it wasn't just I became it, I realized I always had been. It was like, and it was staggering. And it was like my whole idea of what life had been just totally changed. It was like I'd always been part of the whole universe. And I felt I could touch the furthest stars, and it was like I dropped into some other kind of field where it was all sort of insubstantial, and there was no time. And I sensed that I was touching the beginning of time. And I know this sounds really far-fetched. And
no, not at all. I think it's amazing. I think just that you were able to tap in. You were obviously a very old soul. Like, just to be able to be that self-reflective, and you're saying 19, 18. I personally think those gap years are so important for kids. I have 2 daughters. I want both of them to take a year off before they go to college, because I think that we're, so much of what you and I have started talking about is, living in the house and the box, and then the car, and then consumerism. And Lord knows, my listeners know, I love a nice shoe and a good bag, but never am I going to be happy no matter what I buy or what, what decorations I'm putting on my walls, or, my daughters being obsessed with clothes and all these things. You're never going to be happy until you're able to really be like self-reflective. And, I think it's fitting that I always say, like, when I meet guests, like, I have feelings about things I'm supposed to talk about. I'm not saying I'm an empath. Maybe I am, but I'm very I think it's interesting that I brought up the ocean.
Yes, it is.
Nature in the beginning of our conversation, because it kind of goes into what you're talking about right now. Yes. Which is all so important, of our souls being taught these lessons in life and going through the trauma of, your childhood and the loss of the parents being married, and then the eczema manifesting, going on that trip, learning from that experience of traveling, which traveling is such a tremendous gift to be able to learn other cultures and talk to new people.
Yeah.
And then the eczema going away. Yeah. Something I will say to you really quickly is, when you brought up eczema, I never had it very badly, but after I lost my dad, my mom will listen and can pipe in on this. I had eczema on my arm right here as a kid, and I would break out and it wouldn't go away. And it was itchy, obviously you had it everywhere. It's horribly uncomfortable. Yeah. And mine manifested after I lost my dad at 13.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. So I think it's interesting that we share that, for sure.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. So that's some kind of trauma response or physiological expression of trauma. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because not everybody gets that. So that's interesting that we share that.
We share that. And then the other thing that's interesting is it's never come back. So I went for, my mom would probably have to tell me the exact, but I know it was after my dad passed away. And then I was struggling with it, putting all the ointments, everything that you do, for probably like a good year, and then gone, never came back again. So it's interesting that you were struggling, dealing with that for so long. And then when you went on that trip, which was like a life-defining trip in your life at that age, that it disappeared, but then it came back again, go ahead. I had to say that though. Go ahead.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, because on that trip, I was for the first time, I guess, other than Speedy, who I mentioned earlier, the tramp, I was suddenly among all these people with totally different nervous systems. In the simple villages where, they're mostly kind of farmers and got, some llamas and alpacas and potatoes. In the highlands, very simple lives in earthen homes with, wood fires and dung fires of dried dung. It's all so organic. And there was this feeling of, gosh, a well-being among the people. I mean, I know they have hard lives, and it seems kind of a little idealistic to say this, but they really did have different nervous systems that were so much more at peace. And they had the thing that basically a baby essentially is never separate from a human body until it's maybe a year old or 18 months old, constantly carried in a blanket on the back, whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's either mum, or it's an older sister, or it's a dad or an older brother. They're just never out of contact, especially their gut. They have their gut against the back of a human body, and they're looking over the shoulder so they can participate. They're getting this rich sensory experience, and their belly is up against a big, warm human body, and they absorb that into their nervous system. And it's so much healthier. This Western thing of putting babies in plastic, the plastic industry around baby buggies and cots, and it's insane. All you need is a blanket and a sling. I mean, I know. Well,
I carried mine on sling. I was like a lunatic because I was so paranoid as a mom. But my babies were always on my body. I agree with you.
That's so good. We did that as well. We got two sons. Yeah,
with the slings. Gosh, I love the slings.
But the
go
thing
ahead.
Is, when I was going to say, and if I may, just like my own little story. When I got back from that trip, I was blown open like I'd never been before by that experience. It was about 6 weeks later, I went home, and I was feeling everything. I was wide open, and I felt light as a feather and transparent, and I was so in love with the world. And I came home, and I remember I was lying in the bath half an hour after getting home, actually to my dad's house, which I didn't live in, but he picked me up from the bus station, and I got into the bath upstairs in their house, and I could hear the pipes, the plumbing sort of whistling and making its noises. And suddenly I knew it so well, those sounds from since I'd been about 10 years old, they'd lived in that house. And I knew these sounds so well. And it was as if the sound of the pipes woke up, this old nightmare. And I'd lived in it all my life without recognizing that it was a nightmare. Basically, I got re-traumatized. Mm-hmm. All my trauma just reignited. But through my childhood, I'd evolved adaptive subpersonalities, whatever, so that I didn't have to live in trauma all the time. The wound was kind of hidden, and instead I was living the adaptations. But when I came home, the adaptations had gone, and I was truly open, and the trauma just totally came back, and I couldn't handle it. It was just too much, too quickly, and it overwhelmed me, and I went into despair, and I staggered through the next few years. I kind of barely I did function, but it was very, very difficult. I was lonely and depressed, anxious, despairing, and until I started meditating. But looking back on it, I mean, what I've been kind of interested in all my life really is since really then was awakening is a real thing. People really can discover their unity with the cosmos, and it's a mind-blowing thing, and it's an incredibly beautiful thing, and it's really unpredictable. So there's no point really trying to make it happen, I think, because it's so unpredictable. But you can do things that give you tastes of it, and they're usually in a meditative context, but not by any means exclusively. And at least that's the context I know best. But I've also it's been for me all about healing as well. And how do the two things fit together? And do they fit together? Do they have anything to do with each other? And I feel they really do, and I think it's, in a way, I think when I look back on it, the reason I got so overwhelmed when I came home, if I'd been in a different place, more resourced, with more support, with more understanding, it would have been an incredible way to release trauma, But instead I just had no support and no resources really. So it was too much. But I think there is a path that I've been kind of weaving along my life of between healing and also touching in to the boundless. And that's what my book, Original Love, is all about. It's about the both tracks, the path of gradual repair and healing and growing and, forming more nourishing relationships and more helpful and real relationships and getting past our adaptations. And on the one hand, and then on the other hand, and interwoven with it is like the path of, discovering stuff about, kind of who we really are and what our consciousness really is and how our consciousness directly links us to the infinite universe. I mean, it's amazing that we can get hits of the infinite.
I think that's amazing. Something I wanted to say and ask you is, you're talking about like kind of your younger years and like tapping into this in the book, but you said, you went on these trips and you tapped into like, all of the things like poetry and things that you've talked about throughout your life. But the trauma, and I talk about this a lot, is you can run from it, but you can't hide, like it's eventually going to bubble up.
Yeah.
And mine bubbled up to the point where I couldn't hide from it in 2020. So mine was, 4 years ago. Tell me about the book and like kind of, I know I'm like kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but tell me a little bit about like how you're able to piece that all together and where you are kind of today? I know I'm jumping way ahead.
No, thank you. Yeah. Well, I did a lot of different kinds of meditation training along the way. And I had a career as a writer for many years that was just awesome, and as a poet. And, but somewhere along the way, I had another kind of real deep shift that came through meditation where I didn't want to be writing anymore. It was just a world of silence and beauty, and I just was filled with a kind of love that didn't need to be talking and writing. My meditation teachers asked me to start teaching, and I did hospice work, and I went into prisons, and I helped as I could, and I started running a meditation center that invited me in as its teacher. And then COVID came and the lockdown. And then I had to pivot how I was teaching to doing it all online. And right around that time, I had a head injury. I fell off my bike. It wasn't like such a catastrophic crash, but my head, I was wearing a helmet, of course, but it hit the pavement, and I got a concussion. It got better. And then it was clear it hadn't got better, and it lasted for symptoms. I still have a little bit of it, actually, but it's a lot better. But it was kind of, in a certain way, it was kind of great because I just couldn't use my brain so much. And then I just had to teach from the heart. All I could do was tap in to what was going on here in my heart.
Yeah.
And just speak however much was needed or not needed from my heart. And early on, I got this download. I'd gone to rest from a lot of teaching, actually, up in the mountains in northern New Mexico, really beautiful place, where some friends of mine lent me a cabin. I thought I was going to just hike and rest. And the first morning, as I was making oatmeal, this sentence came to me, and I just knew I had to write it down. So I grabbed my pad, and I basically didn't stop writing for 12 days. And it was the first draft of this book, Original Love, that just mapped out, this is how meditation really works. This is the map that most people don't know. They'll know parts of it, but not the whole of it. And we need really the whole of it. And so, I mean, it's taken a lot of work beyond those 12 days to have it in a finished form. But that was the origin of this book and this way of teaching, Original Love, where, that boundlessness that we can sometimes just drop into. Sometimes it's called original nature. In Buddhism, it's sometimes called original nature. And I think of it as original love. And it shows up in lots of other ways that, are less dramatic, but no less beautiful. Every time we feel, some little shift in life where we open up to a new perspective, often there's some kind of hint of love that we feel around that. Gratitude, surrender, a kind of sweet awe, or humility. And, it's faces of the same love, I think. So the book is really my expression of that love, and how I think it's the real purpose of meditation, is to get closer to that love.
I think that sounds amazing. What I find striking is you talk about, all of these experiences that you've had in life, but no matter like where we are in this journey of life, we're always going to be pushed back down. Right. So like the accident of work, of like doing the self-reflection and the meditation and all the things, the writing, and then, thinking that you're on that path of being a writer, and then being pushed down yet again to this whole new experience of having to learn to maybe not do that, and all the chances that we can have, like I talk about for myself, and I talk to my listeners and people that follow me a lot about having multiple careers. Like I moved here because I was an actress. I wanted to be famous when I was in my 20s, and I moved to LA and tried to follow that dream, and it didn't work out for me. And then I was in sales, and I worked my way up into like a sales career. And I started having debilitating panic attacks and all the things which is really interesting how we're connected in 2020, COVID, that whole thing. I think for people that struggle with trauma in life, COVID was a defining thing for a lot of people in different ways, because you couldn't run anymore. You were trapped in your home and you were stuck.
Yes.
And then to have that accident, which, this is just me listening to you and knowing you for the hour that we've been talking. But even in the worst things in life, like a horrible accident where you get this horrific concussion and you have to learn new things, and you were, I'm assuming, in pain and all the things, and it was hard to remember things. That is like a gift, because it gave you a chance to sit there and self-reflect. And then, to write all of that in 12 days, like I want some of that. I'm trying to write my book that's never going to be done. So I had to say that, because I'm sure you know that, but just for my listeners too, to think about that.
Yes. By the way, I would say, I didn't almost feel like I wrote that book. I almost don't feel like I wrote it, because it was a dictation. And a lot of what was in it, I couldn't ever have thought of, really, especially at that time, I just heard the words and wrote them down. And then it's true that I did do a lot of work on it over the years since. And so did my very patient, kind wife, Claire. And so did some friends. And I hired a brilliant editor as well who helped. So I have had help, But yeah, isn't it interesting how things happen that kind of push us to find new ways, to new avenues that we might not have thought we wanted, but they turn out to be just what we need. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I really, I feel these days like the more I trust, then the less I need to know the path ahead. And then the more I can just kind of go where I seem to be either led or pushed without it needing to be my planning. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I find that a gift in itself, just to be in that mind space. I think I'm not there, but I think that's why I need to read your book, and why people need to read your book, to be able to tap into these things, because it's not easy when we're constantly in a place of, survival and running, and just to sit in the stillness and self-reflect and all the things you've kind of talked about. For the sake of time, because I could talk to you for a very long time, because I feel like I've cut short so many amazing stories about your life. What is the main takeaway? Like, if somebody were to go out, and I hope they're going to be running to get the book, that you can tell somebody that meets you, like if you were Speedy, right? Because I'm assuming you're somebody Speedy. Like you've already struck me just sitting here for an hour talking to you, that you've been a mentor and taught so many people throughout your life. What's something that you can like, one little nugget that you can leave my listeners with?
What I'd want to say is, and what I do want to say to anybody who's curious, is like, basically, you yourself are a boundless miracle. That there's no limit to what a wonder you yourself are. And so any kind of practice, whether it's yoga, meditation, or dream work or whatever it might be, any kind of practice, really, it's like helping you be you, and along that journey, we'll find trauma. We'll need to sort of work with it and release it and move through it and get to know it better so we can accommodate it as needed, so we can not be tripped out by it, and there is a path. There is a path to letting, the wonder that you are show itself more and sort of unfold like the petals of a bloom, There is a path for that. And there's, when I say there is a path, there's a path for you, for each of us individually, our path. And I guess the thing is not feeling we have to sort of follow someone else's path, but finding our own, trusting our own selves with our own path. So that was a bit long, but
no, I love that. I think it's true. I mean, we're all, and also we're all going to go through hard things again. So if you work on yourself, like you obviously have and are able to do, it almost prepares you for the next thing,
Yes, I think that's true. But I also think that, I certainly have had new hard things in life, which required developing more resources and more loving capacity, So it's not like I've got to some point where I can handle everything. It's like,
well, you wouldn't be here, Henry, if you could, because that's what I think it is. I mean, if we were done, we would be done. I take in closing, I'll tell this quick story. I take this 92-year-old lady I go to church on Sundays with her, and I don't take her every week, but I take her like once a month. And then there's like kind of a carpool of us that takes her, and her name's Pat. I've talked about her before. She's this amazing lady that I just adore. And we went to mass on Sunday, and, there's this group of people, they're all, in their 80s, and I would say some 70s, 80s, and Pat's probably one of the oldest ones. And they were asking her, she was telling somebody behind me that two of her friends had passed away in the past month. And, she was talking about how hard it is. And then she looked at the three people that she was talking to, and she said, sometimes I wonder why I'm still here and I'm not done. And like, it struck me, and I'm going to get emotional because I love this lady. And I looked at her and I said, well, because you're not done. Like, you're still supposed to be here. And, when it's time and we've learned all our lessons, then you'll be done and you'll be in a better place, because this is an amazing woman, kind, like one of the greatest people I've ever met. And so I think everything you're talking about, it's all about like lessons and things that we can take away in life. But it's just truly such an honor to meet you today and sit here and talk to you. What struck me in my brain, my ADHD brain, which is scattered and goes everywhere. This is part of why I have a hard time with meditation, is I just kind of thought to myself when you were talking, and some of the things you were saying was, I'm so lucky to do what I do and meet people like you, Henry. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You truly are a remarkable human. And I can't wait to read your book.
Meghan, so are you. I feel very, very lucky and privileged to have met you and to have this time with you. Hey, if you'd like to try our app.
I was just going to say that. Tell my listeners really quickly, because in closing, I want to tell them where to get the book again. So the book's called Original Love, The 4 Ins on the Path of Awakening. It's available now. Where can they get it? Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all good bookstores. probably have it,
And then the app.
Yeah, the app is available on the App Store and on Google Play, and it's called The Way. And
tell me about The Way, because I'm going to download it now, actually.
Well, what's sort of special about it is it's the only, as far as we know, it's the only meditation app that doesn't have lots of choices. We've just done one pathway that will help anybody and will guide and sort of instruct anybody to get into meditation. So every time you come on, you just do the next session. It's like Duolingo, for languages. It's like that for meditation, because, I really believe meditation can be taught, and it's not like, and, our research showed that quite a lot of people get a sort of decision fatigue when they open up an app and there's 100 courses. I don't know which one I'm supposed to do. I don't know which is right for me,
I'm raising my hand because I just, no lie, did this just last week. And I'm not going to say the app, but I have been in the process of trying to do the meditation thing. And it's so confusing because there's too many choices. So this is a brilliant idea and exactly what I actually need. Somebody like me that doesn't want to spend all that time going through one by one, listening to the different voices and trying to break down which one to do. It's extra work, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is just one pathway, one training. It's a year long. I mean, you can take it for as long. You can take it at any pace you like, actually. But if you did one a day, it's a year's worth of pathway. And we believe it's a really deep training in all the main possibilities of meditation, and it's for anybody.
Okay, I can't wait. I have a feeling. What if I start it and then I sleep for 20 hours? How will I get my kids to camp?
Maybe wait till they're in camp.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to the beautiful Beth Grossman that I love, that I just adore that woman who connected us. And thank you to all of you that listen every Tuesday, or they listen each week. I'm so grateful for my listeners. Everyone, keep going. You matter. Your story matters. Thanks, Henry.
Thank you so much.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.